The Prime Minister had yet another address to the nation this morning at 9 a.m. This time, he held out a new mission for all citizens to come together at 9 p.m. on Sunday, turn off all their lights and collectively light candles. The Prime Minister is doing this to give people a sense of purpose at a time of great anxiety. The opposition is hitting out at the BJP and the Prime Minister calling this an exercise in showmanship. Let me take you through our lead story tonight.
9 मिनट के लिए मोमबत्ती, दिया, टॉर्च या मोबाइल की फ्लैशलाइट जलाएं.
A 9-minute show of solidarity by lighting candles, lamps and mobile flashlights at 9 p.m. on Sunday. The message: 130 crore Indians coming together to defeat darkness and despair. The call for unity came from Prime Minister Narendra Modi at 9 a.m. on Friday.
5 अप्रैल को रविवार को रात 9 बजे घर की सभी लाइटें बंद करके घर के दरवाजे पर या बालकनी में खड़े रहकर 9 मिनट के लिए मोमबत्ती, दिया, टॉर्च या मोबाइल की फ्लैशलाइट जलाएं.
The last time that the Prime Minister asked for a similar show of solidarity by banging plates and clapping hands on Janta curfew. Many had organized rallies and processions, blowing all social distancing norms to pieces.
इस आयोजन के समय किसी को भी कहीं पर भी इकट्ठा नहीं होना है. सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग की लक्ष्मण रेखा को कभी भी लांघना नहीं है.
This symbolic fight against the coronavirus has left the opposition unimpressed. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor referred to Modi as a photo op Prime Minister. TMC's Mahua Moitra said that the Prime Minister should get real.
आप दिखाना चाहते हैं कि कोरोना के खिलाफ सिर्फ आप ही हैं और सिर्फ आप ही कोरोना के खिलाफ लड़ते हैं. इसलिए कभी थाली बजाने की बात करते हैं, ताली बजाने की बात करते हैं, अभी मोमबत्ती जलाने की बात करते हैं.
The BJP is calling the criticism immature.
कई बार तो मुझे इनके बचपने पर हंसी आती है. मैं तो यही कहूंगा कि ग्रो अप, थोड़े बड़े होइए, थोड़े परिपक्व बनिए. देश के अंदर इस समय एक संकट है, सबको इसके अंदर मिलकर चलना है.
The Prime Minister's address has triggered mixed reactions. While there's appreciation for his attempt to keep the people's spirits high, the opposition has targeted the Prime Minister for not making any specific announcement that is meant to help the poor survive the economic upheaval as a result of the lockdown. Paulami Saha in Delhi for India Today.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is exhorting citizens to light candles come Sunday. Is this a masterful exercise in mass mobilization, or is this just showmanship by what the Congress is calling a photo opportunity Prime Minister? Joining us on the Newstrack, representing the Bharatiya Janata Party, Jai Panda, representing the Congress Party, its most articulate spokesperson, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Jai Panda, I want to start this debate with you. Explain to everyone who's watching why you think that this whole idea of lighting candles at 9 p.m. on Sunday is something which serves any purpose. Because you have a lot of people, they're sitting at home, they don't have much to do, but why bring them together? The opposition calls this a tamasha by a photo opportunity Prime Minister. Jai Panda.
I think it's very unfortunate that the opposition is seeking to make politics out of this and is calling it a photo op and theatrics. Let me make a very important point here. Unlike in authoritarian countries where they can simply clamp down, democracies require communication. it requires the leadership to reach out to the people and convince them. And especially a democracy like India, which is the world's largest and most diverse, we have 1.3 billion argumentative Indians. And without convincing them, without carrying them, not everybody will comply. As it is, we are seeing small groups of people not complying with public health guidelines, and that creates a lot of problems. So it is very, very crucial. And which is why when the Prime Minister started with the Janata curfew and reached out, that was an exercise, one, to celebrate our frontline workers, the doctors, the nurses, the medical and essential services people. But also while celebrating them, it had another purpose, which was to bring people together, to provide a sense that this is a national imperative that we must all contribute to. And now we are midway through this, almost midway through this 21-day lockdown. And it was also important for what the Prime Minister did today in his video message to reach out, to address the concerns that people have. People have been cooped up, they're lonely, they have concerns, and that's normal because we are not used to being confined for such long times. And to ask them again to come together on Sunday night, on April 5th, to light candles is another motivational exercise to make everybody recognize that we are all in this together. Now, these motivational exercises are crucial and they go hand in hand with many other hard decisions that the government is taking. And for that, everybody around the world is complimenting the preemptive steps that the Indian government took and continues to take, starting with shutting down flights from China back in early January, starting with the steps that are being taken now to ensure that all resources are fully mobilized to contain this pandemic. So it must go hand in hand. The enforcement of the lockdown and social distancing must go hand in hand with motivational communications by the leadership.
Dr. Tharoor, the BJP says, look at the entire suite of actions. The Janta curfew set the stage for the national lockdown. The 9 minute, 9 baje creates a sense of shared collective purpose, and therefore it brings the country together. And therefore, the BJP is hoping that even you will be joining this exercise come Sunday night.
Oh yeah, no, I'll light a lamp, that's not a problem. The issue is not that. I agree with my friend Jay that democracies require communication. In every other democracy, the president, the prime minister is out there communicating every day to the nation what tangibly is being done about COVID and about fighting this terrible virus. We expected the prime minister to do the same thing at some point, even if halfway through this lockdown, to tell people what are we doing to ensure that our doctors get personal protective equipment. What are we doing to ensure that our nurses and staff and doctors in some hospitals aren't running greater risk of infection because of our government's inability to provide these basic things? What are we doing to import, manufacture, distribute whatever more ventilators into the ICUs? What are we doing to ensure rapid testing for people so that we can follow the WHO mantra of test, trace, isolate, treat? What are we doing at the same time about the consequences of the lockdown? The nation has seen the unplanned disaster that befell the migrant workers. What is the government going to do in future to ensure that it thinks through the consequences of its decisions? What are the factors that the Prime Minister is weighing in his mind now? What the daily wage workers? Are they going to get money in their Jan Dhan accounts? Is the PM Kisan amount going to be doubled or even more to 7,500 rupees, as we suggested? What's happening to pensioners? What's happening to the Manrega workers who have not been paid for months? What's happening to the state governments who want their GST dues paid by the central government? What about business people? How are they going to be able to cope? Will there be tax relief or other forms of relief, interest waivers? These are the questions uppermost on the minds of people. Motivation is all very well. We're motivated. By and large, people have been observing the government's lockdown. There have been exceptions, and those have been reflective of failures of communication by the government. But where are the substantive issues? Is the Prime Minister going to take the nation into confidence as to what considerations will weigh in his mind as we get to the end of the 21 days? Is he going to tell the nation, I have to consider this, but I have to wait against that? I have to see, for example, whether we should have a staggered lifting of the lockdown, whether we need to extend the lockdown. What are the considerations? Why leave the people in the dark? This is the behavior of an autocracy. It is not the behavior of a democracy. In a democracy, you do communicate with people. In a democracy, you tell the people what they desire to know, what they need to know for their own safety, their own security, their own well-being. I light a lamp, but it's not going to keep me any safer, and nor is it going to illuminate very much of the thinking of the Prime Minister.
Jai Panda, Dr. Tharoor using strong words to accuse the BJP government of acting in an autocratic fashion, saying energies should be focused more on better implementation of the national lockdown rather than symbolic actions. States are desperate for funds. The Congress says try and fix that part of the problem rather than resorting to showmanship. Jai Panda.
The Congress is resorting to politics, and I'm disappointed that my friend Shashi Tharoor thinks that symbolism is not important, because as I explained earlier, it is important to bind us all together as one nation. As you are aware, Rahul, there are still instances of groups of people who are not only not willing to abide by public health guidelines, but are actively concealing themselves and even attacking frontline workers like doctors and essential services personnel. So this effort to keep us all together as one nation with a single objective of fighting this pandemic is extremely important. But let me point out, it's not for no reason that the World Health Organization and other international bodies are felicitating India, are complimenting India for the actions taken. You know, India today, because of the actions taken over the past few weeks, has more than 1.5 lakh hospital beds dedicated for COVID patients. It has 258 hospitals dedicated for COVID patients. It has more than 1 lakh ICU beds. Now, regarding ventilators, this is a concern around the world. India has taken proactive steps. There is a company in Rajkot which has started producing 40 ventilators a day. There are other contributions from DRDO and the Indian Navy in terms of innovations, which it would take just too long to explain. But let me say this. Those of us in my party have been working night and day. Millions of BJP Karyakartas have been volunteering with the permission of local administrations to provide food to the most needy, such as migrant workers. Now, when Shashi said that it was unplanned, it was completely wrong, because migrant workers have been tended to throughout the country. It is only in a couple of states where they did not get the confidence that where they stayed, they would be provided with food and medicines, that there was a scare and people started trekking home. Now, fortunately, because of interventions by both the union government and by many state governments, that confidence has been built. And by and large, that issue has diminished quite a lot. So it's unfair to keep talking about problems which are getting solved as if it is some kind of a catastrophe. Now, let me point something else out. The reality is that the vast majority of Indians have faith in Prime Minister Modi and his leadership in handling this crisis. Just a couple of days ago, a major national newspaper reported that 83% of Indians have confidence that Modi ji is doing the right thing and will tackle the problem properly. And to try to make politics out of this on such a situation, I don't think is going to be appreciated by people. I urge my friends in the Congress, most of all Shashi, to be much more temperate and not be so cynical about lighting a lamp. It serves a very important purpose to keep us all focused on this issue as one team, as one nation.
Dr. Tharoor, would you concede that Prime Minister Modi has actually done quite a remarkable job of mobilizing the national administrative machinery in a manner that other governments would have struggled? If you look back at the functioning of previous governments, compare that with, yes, there have been niggles, there have been lots of rollout problems, but by and large, he's been able to get the machinery to rally around him, and he's been able to mobilize citizens. You understand my mass psyche so well. He's been able to get a majority of the citizens to mobilize in a manner that any other past leader would have struggled to.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because we do know about the preparations that were undertaken by the Manmohan Singh government during the threat of the Ebola virus, which didn't actually materialize in the end. But testing kits were arranged, hospital beds were prepared, everything very quietly without any tali bajawing or candle lighting. But let me say, I'll take Jay at his word that all these preparations have been done. I'll take you at your word that Mr. Modi has been active in mobilizing the government. Why didn't we hear this from the Prime Minister? What I'm saying is it's the job of the Prime Minister in a democracy to tell the people, to reassure the people, look, we've taken these actions. We've got these beds ready. We have ordered these protective kits. We are reading in the newspapers, as you know, that some doctors are threatening to resign because they fear they will be infected in the absence of adequate masks, gowns, gloves, and other protective equipment. We want to hear from the Prime Minister that he understands the problems and he has addressed them. He gave us nothing. He only gave us the motivation and the symbolism. As I said, we'll go along with that, but that's not enough. It is not enough because the country needs and expects more from a Prime Minister. It expects from a Prime Minister that he will take the nation into confidence, tell the nation what's going on, address their legitimate fears. Jay hasn't even addressed the entire question of the financial anxieties of the public. We've got to come up with some very practical suggestions. Our former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, has explained very clearly that the money can be found for the very specific suggestions we have made, including 7,500 rupees in the Jan Dhan accounts, the PM Kisan Yojana and the pension funds. The fact is, the practical solutions that the government could implement were missing from the first financial package. We hope it was only a first one that was announced by Mrs. Sitaraman. And so we have said there should be a second package urgently because people are deeply worried. Don't forget there are places closing down for lack of liquidity. There are daily wagers who don't know where their next meal is coming from for lack of a daily wage. There are serious issues facing our country. We are all behind the lockdown. We're all behind what needs to be done. When Jay says, of course, there was planning, I'm sorry, we had a 48-hour notice for the Janata curfew on a Sunday, and we had only 4 hours notice for a 21-day lockdown. Can you imagine if the government had given, let's say, 4 days notice, saying that in 4 days planes and buses and trains would be shut down? Those of you who have to go somewhere, go home, go now. Those of you who need assurances for food, tell us. Employers, here are your instructions. Make your plans and arrangements. Make sure you shelter your workers, you don't fire them. Whatever it may be, the whole set of instructions should have been given. That's what planning and foresight is all about. You don't do things at 4 hours notice the way you demonetize the country at 3 hours notice and paralyze the economy and hurt so many individuals for so many weeks and months. That's not the way in which a democratic government should be functioning. The flair for the theatrical, the flair for the dramatic gesture is wonderful showmanship. It doesn't actually communicate in a democracy what people are entitled to know from a serious Prime Minister treating them as adults. Where is the Prime Minister chosen to take any opposition party into confidence? Where is he called on the people to say, this is why I need your trust, this is what I've done, and this is what I'll be doing? So these are all questions to which I'm sorry we were left without answers today.
Before I go to Jai Panda, you're coughing a bit. I hope you're doing okay. Nowadays, the moment somebody coughs, my heart skips a beat. So I hope you're okay, and that's most important. We'll continue the debate. That's not a big issue. I hope you're okay.
I'm fine. Thanks, Rahul. I'm fine.
Jai Panda, respond to the specific charge that the Prime Minister is not getting into details. How many personal protective equipment kits are being bought? How many tests will be done? What's being done about finances? The states need money. The Congress says he's guilty of theatrics and showmanship. He's not treating citizens as adults. He's treating them as toys, as kids, giving them something to stay busy with.
I recall the words of my late friend Shri Arun Jaitley, who used to point out that the Congress and Shashi's party is determined to find a problem in every solution. The reality is the Prime Minister is working 15 to 20 hours every day, as are his senior ministers in the cabinet, including the Home Minister. And the Prime Minister is not just communicating to build team spirit and to keep everybody focused on the goal of getting through this lockdown. He's also having video conferences across the country with chief ministers, with top administrators, chief secretaries. He's been having video conferences with major social influencers, like today he did with major sports personalities. So it's not just communications. I gave you the examples of the hospital beds and other arrangements that have been made. Now remember something, if you want to nitpick, you can find an excuse to nitpick about anything. Now Singapore, which is a small country and tried to get away by not having a lockdown all these weeks, but enforcing strict social isolation, has today announced a strict lockdown for 1 month. So the lockdown, when it was announced, was well timed. Any earlier, it would have done much more damage to the economy, and it was premature. But any later, and things would have spiraled out of control. And as far as the specific questions Shashi was asking, now remember, just earlier this week, the finance minister announced a 1.75 lakh crore stimulus to the economy, most of it aimed at the bottom of the pyramid, involving cash transfers to migrant laborers and the poorest and most needy Indian citizens. Now, I can just go on and give you more statistics, but I think it is much more important to understand that the Prime Minister, in fact, is coordinating with opposition parties. In fact, he's coordinating with all opposition states and all states, including states which are run by opposition parties. And he's not making politics out of it. He is stepping in and doing whatever the union government is asked to do by these states. Now, Shashi may not be aware of this because the central leadership of his party has been just focused on the blame game rather than anything concrete. Many of the suggestions made by state governments of all hues have been implemented. And, the reality is, let me again point you back to that survey where 83% of Indians
Dr. Tharoor,
have expressed confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership, and they don't think that he's letting them down.
The ultimate test lies in the numbers. I'm putting out the trajectory tracker on our screens right now. The Indian curve is shorter. Mercifully, it has a lesser incline than countries like the United States, like countries like Italy, Spain, far more developed with better medical facilities. It's the same virus in different countries. We're seeing different levels of fatality and infection. It can be argued that a part of that credit has to go to the government at a time when Donald Trump has shown how not to lead, at a time when the Brazilian President Bolsonaro is saying, I'll ride out the storm, so what if it's an infection, it's a flu, I'm an athlete. Narendra Modi has understood the depth of the problem and responded to it as only a very competent leader would. Final words, Dr. Tharoor.
Well, first of all, I find it slightly ironic that my friend Jay is quoting the Singapore Prime Minister, whose communication to his people has been a model of exactly what the Indian citizens would have liked to have seen from Prime Minister Modi. You've seen repeatedly, they're going around WhatsApp, the Prime Minister's confident, at the same time reassuring, at the same time fact-filled assurances to his people. That's what we needed here. We haven't got it. Secondly, as I said, I'm willing to take everything that Mr. Jayapanda tells us has been done by the Prime Minister. Why doesn't he tell us himself? Why doesn't he tell the nation what he's doing? Why doesn't he tell the nation what he's thinking? We still don't know. What are the factors that are going to weigh in his mind? As the 21-day lockdown winds down, what's next? He's got to take the nation into confidence. See, these symbolic gestures, the banging of the thalis, the lighting of the lamps are all very well. They're simply not enough. Solidarity is fine. We give you solidarity. We are committed. We are Indians.
Okay.
We're as vulnerable as anybody else in the BJP. The fact still is we're doing our bit. I'm very proud to say that my constituency became the first place to get rapid testing kits delivered right to the hospitals today. And that was done because we're also working very hard, even if it's in the conditions of lockdown, through the internet, by WhatsApp, on the phone, whatever, to get relief to our constituencies.
All right.
So the opposition's also working. Don't knock everything in terms of politics by saying the opposition doesn't cooperate, doesn't support the government. We're saying the government should earn that support by confiding in the nation, take the nation seriously, give us the information, and then we'll happily light lamps as well, but only as a well-informed citizenry and not merely a citizenry dancing to the tune of a photo op.
You may have disagreed on the necessity of lighting lamps, but for lighting up the Newstrack with the power of your arguments, Shashi Tharoor and Jayapanda, thank you for joining us in India today. We're slipping into a break. When we come back, part 2, and I strongly suggest that you stay back and watch this, because I'll be in conversation with the world's leading foreign affairs expert, Fareed Zakaria. What will the post-COVID-19 world look like? He'll diagnose the emerging global order in a conversation you simply cannot afford to miss. Hello and welcome. The epicenter of the global battle against the coronavirus at this time lies in New York. The United States is supposed to have the world's best medical facilities, but its response to the pandemic has been abysmal. Even developing countries seem to be doing better than the world's most advanced country. What are the global geopolitical, strategic and economic implications of the coronavirus pandemic? To diagnose the emerging new world order, I'm joined at this time live from New York by the world's foremost foreign affairs expert, Fareed Zakaria. Fareed, welcome. You're at the epicenter of the entire problem at this moment. How are you doing yourself?
I'm fine. I'm staying about New York. I go into New York, into the CNN studios to do the show, my show every Sunday. But it's a whole new world, Rahul. I walk into the building; it's empty except for one security guard at the ground floor, and then one security guard at the floor I work at. I go into an empty studio, what as you know we call a flash studio. There's a robot camera, robot lights. Everything is being controlled from one studio in Atlanta, and then I have my entire team on their computers at home, working from home, but managing the show. So it's a more difficult show to put together, but we've managed to do it, and I think we're doing very well under those circumstances. For those who are real fans of the show, you'll notice we can't do as much in terms of graphics, and we can't do as much in terms of editing. But there is, on the other hand, an incredible kind of urgency to what we're doing. So personally, I'm fine. Professionally, I'm fine. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the country and the world.
Okay, now zooming out, how do you think COVID-19 is changing the world as we know it forever?
Oh, that's a big question. I think that the biggest danger, I would say, is that what it is doing is pulling the world apart in a way that will be very hard to bring back together. So let's just think about it at one simple level of borders and travel. We had gotten to a point where people had gotten very used to the idea that the world was their oyster. You could move around, you could go from one place to another easily without any friction. What is possibly going to happen now is, if this continues and intensifies, you are going to see states reestablish controls on borders. Let's say you have to go somewhere, you will have to get some kind of medical certificate or a test that you have to clear before you can go somewhere. If you land in a place and they're taking temperatures at every airport, if you have fever, you will be quarantined. All of which will act as obstacles and barriers to people freely traveling and mingling. And I use that because it's a kind of metaphor. We have lived in a very globalized world for the last 30 years. You already were seeing, because of nationalism, because of protectionism, a certain amount of deglobalization. Well, that deglobalization will intensify and will affect not just goods and services, but also people, if we end up in a situation where everyone puts barriers on. Look at one central example, the European Union. Travel within the European Union, the so-called Schengen zone, you didn't even need a passport, you needed nothing. Now they have closed borders, France, Germany, Italy, for the first time in 25 years.
One of the things that we've seen over the past few weeks is increasing surveillance. A lot of the countries that have been able to get the coronavirus reasonably under control have used advanced technologies to keep a very close eye on where their citizens are, where the COVID suspects are, in a manner of speaking. How does this impact privacy going forward? At this moment, it seems reasonable. Even the government in India is rolling out an app. At this moment, no one's complaining. What are the long-term implications of this increased surveillance?
Rahul, I think you put it right. The short-term issue is not really a problem, because we would all want this virus to be stopped. We would all, I think, be more than happy to provide information. There's one example I can give you. In the United States, for example, there's a thermometer maker that has, as part of the purchase agreement, you give the data. And it is able to, with 1 million thermometers, figure out where you are seeing spikes in temperature as a way of figuring out, predicting where you are going to see the next cluster of coronavirus uptakes. So this part of it is obviously necessary. People will be more than willing to give it. But what it does do is it opens the door to what some people have called surveillance capitalism and the surveillance state, where it is possible theoretically for the state to amass enormous amounts of information about you. And of course, India has thought about this issue already because of Aadhaar. The way I would put it is this: you cannot undo the technological wave. You cannot unlearn the fact that these technologies exist, that this data can be used. What those of us who live in democracies with the rule of law have to do is to make sure that you put in place very good, strong rules that say these are the conditions under which you can use it, these are the constraints, these are the checks, these are the balances. Without those, individual liberty will be threatened. But I think with those, we can live with it. We can win just in the ways we've lived with, various protections we all have from terrorism, for whatever it is. But there is a real tension, and it's very important that we not just allow the government to impose whatever its rules are. This is an area where civil service, civil society needs to participate. Judges, lawyers, we have to get everybody involved in this, so that we end up with a system where people, the government does have the tools it needs to deal with emergencies like this, but it should be in emergencies. There should be otherwise constraints. There should be checks and balances. And I fear that, what happens in emergencies never gets undone. And that's why it's very important for there to be a next stage after all this, where we ask ourselves, how do we create a system that we can live with that allows individual liberty, democracy to flourish, while at the same time allowing the state the capacity it needs?
This is a global crisis which called for a global response, but it's really thrown up the crumbling global order. What are the implications for multilateral bodies like the World Health Organization, which have come so much under attack? At every moment, questions are being asked about whether they're giving authentic advice, whether people can believe their advice, and increasingly, their credibility seems to have been smashed to smithereens.
Yeah, look, this is the fundamental challenge, Rahul. This is a global phenomenon. There's nothing we have seen really before that is truly as global as this. This is almost a kind of biblical challenge, because this is a genuine global threat to the entire planet, to every society. And so what you would want to see is a global response. This is a case where it really emphasizes to us, it seems to me, our shared humanity. We are all vulnerable. Rich, poor, black, white, brown, it doesn't matter. The virus does not discriminate in any way, right? And so what you need is a global response. You need a human response, from all of humankind. And instead, what we're seeing is that only the virus is globalized. Every response to it is narrow, national, parochial, and as a result, suboptimal, bad, right? Because what you really need is to coordinate these travel advisories and travel closings so that you can smoothly move people. If you're going to say nobody can travel, you give people a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you end up with what's happened in India and the United States and Europe, which is massive numbers of people crowding into train stations, airports, which sort of defeats the purpose of the travel bans in the first place. You want a pooling of resources and a coordination of research so that scientists are sharing all the information so we get the vaccine fast, rather than the Chinese quietly doing their thing and the Americans doing their thing and the Germans doing their thing. You would want, when you start to reopen, you would want there to be a coordination, because if you want to try and reopen travel, you want to have similar standards in various countries, so you don't have this crazy patchwork where you're trying to figure out, well, if I want to go to Europe, what tests do I have to get? And if I want to go to India, what? All these things call for a common approach. But instead, people have been pulled, backward. The WHO is really just the symbol of it, because the truth of the matter is what really has to happen is at a international governmental level, you need a much greater degree of cooperation. And then you can agree to place some of that coordinating authority with the WHO, or we can create a new body, or it could be done by the G20. But our fundamental problem is that when we are threatened globally, we are retreating nationally. We are becoming more tribal, when the answer is obviously we need to be more global. And it's a stretch, but the trouble is we won't solve this problem. And the next one could be worse. Remember, this is not airborne. You could end up with a pandemic which is airborne, in which case it really shuts down life in a way that we can't even imagine now. How would we deal with that challenge? And this is why I say the great tragedy is that the United States is absent, because, look, nobody likes American hegemony, but in the absence of it, you end up with a vacuum, you end up with chaos, you end up with, no coordination. And for the time being, we don't have an alternative. Nobody, in my opinion, nobody is going to accept Chinese leadership, and so you're stuck with either U.S. leadership or a power vacuum and chaos. And right now, the U.S. administration is not even trying to assert U.S. leadership. It's a very bad luck that we have come across a global challenge at the same time that you have the most nationalist American president in 70 years.
China is attempting to use this global vacuum to enhance the speed of its global march. How successful have those efforts been? We've seen on Chinese media a massive propaganda effort. They're sending their doctors, they're sending masks and ventilators and surgical gear to Italy and to Europe, and they're making it seem as if China is coming to the world's rescue. How successful has that propaganda effort been in your view? And is this changing the way the world perceives China?
I think it's difficult to tell. I think obviously the countries that are receiving supplies are grateful. Obviously they regard China as playing a positive role in those situations. But I don't think that it changes the fundamental reality for many democracies that China is a system that is very different. And as a system, it's very difficult to admire. You may respect it, but it's difficult to admire, and it's difficult to imagine being willing to, give leadership to. I think the Chinese will try, but their experiences even before this in Africa were countries take the money, they take the assistance, but you need more than that. You need soft power. Right now, China has very little soft power. You don't get soft power by giving people medical masks. You give soft power by both embodying and by leading on a set of values that the world is, wants to move toward. And I tend to still believe that what most people in the world want is to live lives in which they have individual rights, individual dignity, individual capacity, and that is not exactly what is happening in China. I may be wrong, but I think that it is still the West and America's to lose this leadership challenge. That China is not a natural fit. I mean, you just think about it in Asia. Are the Japanese willing to accept Chinese leadership? Is India willing to accept Chinese leadership? Is Vietnam, is Korea? And so I think it's more challenged than people realize. I think that if you got another American president, things could turn around pretty quickly. But for now, you face the reality of a China on the march, and America absent, and a world in chaos.
It's interesting the way you put it. This crisis has seen two contrasting approaches. On the one side, you've got the Prime Minister Narendra Modi approach of a complete national lockdown. On the other side, you've got the Brazilian President Bolsonaro saying, I'll ride out the storm, I've been an athlete, it's just a flu, I'll deal with it, and let's bash on regardless. Only time will tell which of those two responses was right. but what do you make of the manner in which different countries have responded? And sitting where you are, what do you think the world is making of the lockdown in India and India's response? The numbers so far very low, but India's response to this global crisis.
I think Prime Minister Modi faced a very difficult choice. There is no easy way out of this. I think he did ultimately the right thing, though it could have been better executed. I think he took a bold measure, which was to act early on the basis of the data. As you say, India has very few cases, but with the full realization of this fundamental fact, which is the Indian healthcare system is so fragile, weak, particularly in rural areas, that if you ended up with a spiraling trajectory, the healthcare system would not just crash, but it would crash in a massive way. And you would have not just deaths from coronaviruses, but deaths from everything else, because the hospitals would be overcrowded, the system would have broken down. I think that was a reasonable supposition for two reasons. One, the Indian healthcare system is very bad. As you know, hospitals per bed, per capita spending on healthcare in India is abysmally low, and maybe this will start a debate about that. But the second is that the nature of the spreading of this virus, which is essentially spreading exponentially. Let me give you an example. I think roughly 4 weeks ago, the United States had about 200, 250 cases. It now has 100,000 plus, right? So that gives you a sense of how fast this can move. The power of exponential growth is crazy, because you go from 20 cases and you can end up with 2 million in a month or a month and a half. And if that is and the virus seems to be growing exponentially almost everywhere. So if you were in that situation, what the best bet is to just try to suppress as much as you can. And then when you open up in 3 weeks, you have slower rates of spread. You can identify the places. Now, the great challenge will be, once you open up in India, can the Indian government do the kind of identification, testing, contact tracing, and isolation that a South Korea did, that a China did? I worry very much about it. The Indian bureaucracy is not good. The healthcare system does not have that capacity. So I would hope that what the Prime Minister is doing is taking these 3 weeks as an opportunity to really ensure that when you come out of it, you do that. Because if you don't, again, the problem is with small numbers, if it becomes exponential growth, you will have taken 3 weeks and done nothing. Trump actually made one good decision. In January, he banned travel from China. That gave America about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. He did nothing with it. He minimized the problem. He refused to talk about it. He refused to issue orders for quarantines. So the challenge for India will come when this lockdown ends. I support this measure. It's a terrible thing, and I know the human cost of it, but it was the rational thing to do given the evidence. The question is what happens when you come out.
When we met last at Davos, you spoke of deglobalization. At that time, slowbalization was a theme as well. The world slowing down, not expecting the kind of economic growth we've seen in the past couple of decades. What do you think will be the big idea that drives the global order in the post-COVID-19 world?
Look, it's up for grabs. Clearly, there will be people who will say this is a sign of the problems of globalization. You have, all these viruses running around the world. We're importing, all these problems. In America, they're trying to blame it all on China. The problem with that is the world is already interconnected. You can try to cordon yourself off, but it won't really work. The Brazilians may think that they can ensure that the virus doesn't come into Brazil. It's already in Brazil. It's all over the world, because the nature of the world we live in is already globalized. There's already trade, commerce, contact around the world. And by the way, that has produced all enormous, good things. I mean, hundreds of millions of people in India and China have been lifted out of poverty. For the rest of the world, you have had access to cheap goods and cheap food. which has raised the quality of life and standard of living all over the world. Let's not forget all the great things that have happened as a result of this contact and commerce and trade and travel. But there will be people who will say, pull up the drawbridge, build walls, let's look inward from, and look, this is a world that I grew up in the 1970s in India. The whole idea was, you want to have as little contact with the outside world as possible, high tariffs, import substitution, non-convertible currency, all that. And what you end up with is a world of impoverishment and stagnation and parochialism, and your horizons get narrowed, your world gets narrowed. I would much prefer that what we take from this is we do live in a global world, and our challenges are all global. Then it's not just with regard to this pandemic. Think about global warming. Think about the challenges on trade, where you want to create some coordinated model where everybody is playing by the same rules. Think about the challenges of having to deal with things like cyber war and cyber attacks. All these networks are globalized. The problems are all globalized. The advantages are all globalized. Our mistake is we insist that the only solution to these things is national. So what I would like to see is not some kind of world government. That's absurd. Nobody wants that. But a greater degree of global governance, not global government, global governance, coordination, pooling together resources, pooling together ideas, and recognizing that fundamentally we are in this together. I mean, if this pandemic doesn't make us realize that we are in this together, what will? We face a global challenge. It is a global threat. It does not distinguish between nations. It does not distinguish between races, castes, creeds. Everyone is in it together. And so if this should spur a greater level of global cooperation. As always, this is the nature of human existence. We have free will. We can make these choices. There is nothing is written. It is going to be ours to choose. Do we go down the path of closing down, shutting down, looking inward, or do we choose this path to broaden to build the bridges, to try to connect, to try to find ways to cooperate? I know which is a better path. I can't tell you with great confidence, given the leadership of the world right now, that we would choose that better path.
Fareed Zakaria, it's always fascinating setting up a conversation with you. I don't think anybody who's watching would have thought there'd ever be a time when the United States seems to be coming apart in its response to a crisis, and other countries far less developed than the US seem to have their act far more in order. So we are in a new world. You help viewers try and make some sense of a world where all the variables are still moving. For joining us from New York, thank you so much. Please stay safe. You're saying you're doing your best to stay home. I hope that your family in Mumbai, your family in New York, they're all staying safe. Thank you, Fareed Zakaria, for joining us.
Thank you, Rahul.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.